Hi guys, this is Sandy. Welcome to a pattern measuring primer. Today we're going to discuss the difference between body measurements and finished garment measurements and that gap in between known as ease. So for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use McCall's 6445 because I am in the process of making a raincoat with this pattern. So it will give us a good hands-on experience as we go through the measuring process. Now, body measurements are pretty self-explanatory. You run a tape measure around your body. Finished garment measurements are the same measurements corresponding, except that that's how much the finished garment is measuring. So you have a bust measurement, a body measurement, and then you have a bust measurement that's a finished garment measurement. And the distance between those two is ease. Now, everybody wants a little bit of different ease on their garments. Some people like them very close fitting. Someone would like them a little bit more loose, depending on your age and your size and where you live and how you behave. And there's lots of reasons why we want ease. And sometimes we want different ease for different occasions. When I'm going to the grocery store, it's going to be very different than if I'm going to a party. So we need to take control of that ease and take it out of the hands of the pattern manufacturer if we want our garments to fit the way we want them to fit. All right, here we are on the back of the pattern measurements. What this shows you is the body measurements associated with the size. Basically, this is just a gauge for purchasing fabric. The pattern already has determined how much ease is in this pattern, and they've adjusted the garment the fabric requirements for that. So you're going to measure and then look down the back of the pattern and determine how much fabric you are going to purchase. That's about as far as we can go right now. Until we can take that pattern out and measure the garment, we're pretty much at the mercy of the pattern company. All right, this is the ease chart that I downloaded from the McCall's pattern website. You can see that on the left-hand side, the silhouette column, lists the different types of ease: close fitting, fitted, semi-fitting, loose fitting, and very loose fitting. And if you go over 3 columns to the coat section, which is where I'm looking today, a fitted coat has 5 1/4, to 3, that's a 6 3/8 inch ease built into the garment. Now that's probably more than enough ease for what you want, unless you wear a jacket every day or a heavy sweater underneath your coat. And if you go down to the bottom of that column, at the very other end of the spectrum, you have a very loose fitting coat, which has over 12 inches of ease. That's crazy. Who wants 12 inches of ease on their coat? Probably no one, right? It's going to look like a bag on you. All right, now making a test garment is the same thing as making a toile or a muslin. They call them all kinds of different things depending on where you live in the world. But basically, it is the main parts of the garment that have some measurement consequences. So in this case, typically it would be the front, the back, and the sleeve. In this case, there's 2 fronts because they're not identical. So there's a left front, a right front, the back, and an undersleeve. So that's what I cut out of my muslin pieces. And I want a muslin fabric that is going to be very similar to my garment. In this case, I'm making a vinyl raincoat. So I chose a lining for draperies. It's fairly inexpensive and it sort of has that same stiffness to it, and that gives me the same type of quality of drape when I'm making this test garment. The next thing I want to determine is what size I want to make. Now, if I look at the body measurements, which you can see on the post-it, I've rewritten them from the back of the pattern. The bust for this garment is 38 to 40 inches. On the tissue, you will see finished garment measurements for the bust, the waist, and the hips, and anything else that's pertinent for that particular pattern. There's a circle with a little cross inside of it. That's the indication that that's where that measurement is taken. So for this garment, for a large, the bust finished garment measurement is 51 inches. That means the difference between the 51 inches and the 48 to 40 inches body measurement is that there's 11 to 12 inches of ease around the bust area for a size large. That's a lot. That's a lot of ease. We have dolman sleeves. There's a lot of fabric floating around there. That's probably going to be too much. But only that can be determined by the person making the garment. All right. Now, if we look at the waistline measurements, the waist measurements on the back of the pattern were 30 to 32 for a large, and the waistline measurements for the finished garment are 51 inches. That's 19 to 21 inches of ease. That's 2/3 of the measurement again. That's crazy. It's going to be like a bag on someone. So I actually moved down on my measurements. My body measurements put me way off the chart. I actually cut a large, which was 3 sizes down for my body measurement, and I added a little bit more at the hip because I needed that to take it in. But I want you to look at this pattern. The model is adorable. That jacket looks super cute on her, but there is no way that there is 21 inches of extra fabric at her waist, nor is there 12 inches of extra fabric at her bust. They've got it all clipped and pinned back for the photographer. And I also want you to look at the curve at her waist in the jacket. This pattern is straight. There's 51 inches at the bust and 51 inches at the waist. There's no curve there. So if you're looking at this photo and you're thinking, I like the way that jacket fits, that's the jacket for me, when you make it, you may be disappointed. So what we want to do is we want to take control of our garment. We want to take control of how this garment fits us so we can be happy with the garment and wear the garment. So you're going to do that by making a test garment. Like I said, front, back. I did the undersleeve, and actually only did one undersleeve, and I did the left and right front. So I went down 3 sizes in my bust and 2 sizes in my hips. So I cut a large in the bust and halfway between a large and an extra large in the hips to give me a little extra room. Now, the neckline on this is too big. Can you imagine if I had cut like an XXL, the thing would be hanging off of me. But you can see it's all rumply and it's standing up. There's too much shoulder fabric and there's too much fabric at the neck. So in order to fix this, I lifted up the back, just the back piece. So what I did was I took the seam out at the shoulders, I lifted the back piece up 1.5 inches, and I restitched it. And that took away all of that extra fabric floating around there. Now, you can see in this photo on the left, I've made that adjustment and how much better that fits on my shoulder and around my neck. On the right side, it's still rumply. The shoulder is hanging up. This is an adjustment that I have to make quite often, and that's what you're going to find. You're going to find that once you make an adjustment, you may have to make that same adjustment on a lot of different patterns, and because my shoulders slope, this is an adjustment I typically need to make. And also, our neck hollows out a little bit as we get older, so there's usually a little extra fabric there. For me, everybody has a little bit of a different fit. Now, I want to make the adjustments to my tissue. That certainly is something that I need to do. I need to transfer these adjustments. So there's a couple of ways of doing that. I can use my test pattern as my pattern, and I would take it all apart. But the first thing I want to do is I want to cut off that 1.5 inches that I lifted up on the back. So my seam allowances are now 5/8 of an inch. So that's one option. The other option is to transfer the changes to the tissue, which is actually what I'm going to do. All right, now I'm going to change the tissue. I'm going to transfer those marks from transfer those changes from my test garment to my tissue. And basically the only change that I made was to take 1.5 inches off the back shoulder seam. So I took my French curve, you can see in the left, and I leveled it up against the edge of the initial garment to get the right curve, because this is a grown-on sleeve, so there is some curve in that sleeve. And then I dropped it down 1.5 inches, made a mark, and cut that extra fabric off because I don't need it. But now I have to consider what other changes I need to make to my other pattern pieces. That neckline, the back neckline, is now shorter because I cut essentially 3 inches off of it. I cut 1.5 inches off of each side. So my neckline is considerably shorter, and the collar on this piece, the back has a separate back collar. It's a 3-piece collar, so I need to make sure that that back collar piece now fits that curve of my neck edge. in order to do that, I wanted to overlay my collar over my new cut back piece at the neck edge. And you can see that the back has a seam going down it, so I need to take into consideration the seam allowance there because the collar piece is cut on the fold. So by lining these pieces up, I actually spotted that. I might have missed it if I hadn't laid them down on top of each other. So now I'm going to start measuring my neck edge from that 5/8 inch seam allowance. And it actually ended up measuring 4 inches. So now I am going to transfer that information to my collar. I'm going to start at the fold and measure out 4 inches and then add the seam allowance in, and then I'm going to be able to lop off that extra because so I measured on this one, I measured from the upper corner all the way down to the front facing. I measured the 4 inches, added the seam allowance, and then cut it. But I cut it on the fold line, so I wanted to make sure that I remarked the fold line on there so I don't cut this with seam allowance because there's no seam allowance in there. So I want to make sure that that gets cut on the fold. Now, all of these changes will help you enjoy your fitted garment much more. You're going to have something that's has the right amount of ease for it. It's going to be comfortable for you to wear, and you're going to be very happy with it. This happens to be the neckline of my raincoat, and I'm very happy with the way it came out. You can see in the center picture there's a seam down the middle, and the collar piece, you can see on the right, the collar piece fits really well because I changed the length of that collar piece to fit the new adjusted length of my neckline. And the picture on the left, you can see my body double, how nicely that falls around the curve. And I still need to put buttons on this, and I will have those for you very soon, and you'll be able to see my finished garment. I hope you enjoyed this little lesson on measuring body measurements and finished garment measurements and how to add or get rid of ease for your garments. Happy sewing.